Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's live stream where I will be having a guest, well-known face on Capture One channels, which is Paul Reiffer. It's good I've got a guest today because I'm suffering a bit from a cold and I've already burst Paul's eardrums a few times with coughing. So it's nice to have someone else to do some talking as well. For those of you on YouTube, welcome. If you want to ask a question and interact, you can. So just put a comment in the chat box on YouTube and we'll see that. Hello to those of you who've done so already. Same goes for Facebook as well, and also for those of you in our live streaming room. If you want to ask a question, pop that in the Q&A chat. Helen is also hanging out on the chat and the Q&A as well. But for her to be able to see the questions and filter them out from the chat, then please put it in the Q&A tab. Otherwise, they might get missed and we might not see all of them. There is rather a lot of you, so if we don't get to your exact question, I just do apologise for not being able to get round to everybody. But without further ado, let's go and find Paul. We'll put us on this nice background of Yellowstone. Hey, Paul.
Hey.
How's it going?
Evening.
Evening. Good. Even, yes.
We got to keep this quite tight because there's a special announcement from a fruit company, apparently, right, in about an hour. So.
Apparently, yeah. And it might be worth watching without saying anything else. Yeah, for the record, an update for Capture One did come out today. So we're on 16.2.4 and there was also an update on Capture One Mobile, which means you can actually shoot tethered to Capture One with this as well. So we're going to actually look at a couple of iPhone shots before everyone throws their hands up in horror saying, why would you want to do that? We could show you possibly why.
They're not bad.
They're not bad, yes. They're not bad at all. Right, so today, this is picking up after our trip, which Paul and I went on quite a long time ago now. Only seems like the other week, but what month was it? We're in September. It was in July, I guess, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, on the road at the time, we were probably doing more editing than we normally would in a rush to, get stuff out on live stream for you guys and girls watching, where typically, I tend to be a bit more excitable and edit there and then. Paul sensibly waits till he gets home. And why is that, Paul? Probably we should answer that question.
Well, so it's a couple of things. So yeah, David was, I think, on one morning you were editing on the plane at 5 a.m. or whatever.
Probably,
the shot at midnight before. Whereas I'll typically spend that time uploading onto a cloud service. So I've got backups and all that sort of stuff. So that's number one, which is I'd rather make sure that I'm bringing all the data home safely before I start playing around with some images. This applies to be clear, where I have control of the timeline. So if we've got a client who's sat there saying, where's my picture? It's a different scenario. But if I'm going out shooting and it's for something that's either a project that I have control of the timeline or it's for my work, then I'll slow things down. Number one, let's get everything safe, secure, triple backed up. So we've got the original card, you've got it on the laptop, and you've got it up somewhere on a storage service somewhere nice and safe. The second thing, and probably the most important one, and we're going to touch on it a lot today, is the decisions that I make with the memory of the picture I took will be very different to the decisions I make in the future when I'm looking at it as a print or as a picture. And there's some examples, but just to sort of plant the seed with people's minds. I've got images. In fact, I shot an image last week where it was painful to get that image. We had rain for multiple instances. We had a fun time getting into that location, let's call it that. It didn't get health and safety approved and all the other stuff. So as a result, I came out of that, frankly, cave thinking, yes, I want to edit that picture. Now, the picture that I thought I was going to use, I then came home, looked at it again, and thought, actually, it's not a great picture. So while it's a great memory and it's a great, I'm looking back to how much effort it took to get it and all the other stuff, when it comes to the cold light of day and you've had more time to settle back, think about it, look at it on a big screen as a potential print, you may make a very different decision as to which one you want to use, if any, in fact. Because you need to separate, and I'm talking specifically about if we're aiming for print sales, we need to separate our feelings from the image from whether it's a print that works. And something that works on a wall may not be the same image that you remember really fondly because you've got all the memories loaded into
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
So giving yourself a bit of distance makes you look possibly slightly more objectively at the shots themselves.
Yeah, and it's removing that emotional element as well. So I'll start with a story. So this is Bonneville Salt Flats, which is a pretty intense place in terms of, I guess, the environment and so on. And it's something that, you've heard about it on TV and everything as well. And
Good place for minimalism.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I think that was probably the first mistake, is trying to make something more traditional and there's a whole bunch of pictures probably from, actually, let's just have a, what was that, day 2, I think, wasn't it? So there's probably a million pictures from the salt flats, which were all not especially interesting, or trying to start off with foreground interest with puddles and all this kind of stuff. And of course, when you see it in the distance, you're like, wow, this place is amazing. There must be a way to make a decent picture out of here, because we had nice sky, good conditions. It was stupidly hot and everything. But at the end of the day, when I saw it on the back of the camera, it looked like that, which was not quite how I imagined it, really, or how it looked, really, to be honest. And, a good Paul Reiffer tip: take a picture with your iPhone. And this was actually leaving. And
or other phones are available.
Other phones are available, exactly. And yes, we know mobile phones tend to be a bit, over the top in terms of their processing, but that actually was a pretty close representation of how it looked.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of actually editing a photo like this, when I first opened it, and obviously was thoroughly disappointed with seeing this, you have to remember, like, quite often that situation is quite difficult for a camera to necessarily record faithfully, especially when you're shooting raw as well.
I think I was going to say, I think that's the key, which is, and I think it's one of the challenges that certainly I have to teach quite often. One of the biggest questions we get from any certainly workshop client is always, how do I make it look like I saw? And the problem is, we don't see with our eyes, we see with our brains. And our brains are interpreting what our eyes see, which is frankly why something like an iPhone is really good for keeping a reference, because it does the processing alike, or in a very similar way to how your brain works. So the two are kind of symbiotic. The phones try and match what you're expecting to see, and then as your expectations change, the phones need to adapt to that. So over the years, they've got really good at giving you the scene that you probably see with your brain. Now, the problem that a camera has when it's shooting in RAW is it doesn't have the brain bit, it's just the eyes. And it's literally just taking, with no interpretation, literally the raw photons, effectively, and recording them, which tends to result in quite a flat image, on the basis that you want all of that data to be safe, so flattened, frankly, nice flat data, because we can then choose how we want to process it later, which is the point of editing.
Yeah, and with not many clicks, I mean, I was just messing around while Paul was chatting there, from the flat result. Obviously, I'm going to probably crop this something like that, and if we have a look in our color editor, assuming if I click around here somewhere, I'm going to land on the warm tones, and I can expand that out a little bit. And then if I pump up the saturation, obviously to slightly ridiculous amounts, then we can see there is that those color values in the file. It's a case of, I guess, trusting the process, not assuming everything on the back of the camera is finality, and that we do have some, ability to draw that out of the raw file as well. I've got opinions on that, Paul, so you don't use exposed to the right. It's not something I really focus on, I suppose, or obsess about, because I think you're way more learned in this than me, Paul, but if it's something you obsess about, then it takes over maybe more important things.
Here's my challenge with the ETTR approach.
Exposed to the right. Sorry, if you're not.
So ETTR being exposed to the right, and what we're talking about is, where do you store most of the data in? And the point of exposing to the right is, for lots of technical reasons, but basically as you shift data to the right-hand side, so in other words, the brighter values, the quality of that data and the difference between the signal and the noise is much greater. So you get effectively a better pixel out of it if you can expose further to the right than to the left. As we all know, as you expose to the left, you're getting shadow information, and unfortunately with shadow also comes noise as you start to recover it. But here's the problem. Most people get exposed to the right wrong, and they expose too much to the right.
Yes.
And the beauty with a shadow is that to some extent I can recover it. The problem with a highlight is I definitely cannot.
Nope.
So if I push something beyond the highlights, it is dead data. So if you're going to expose to the right, great, enjoy that. You better be good at it.
Yeah.
Because if you're shooting, for example, into direct sunlight, or you're dealing with cities and stuff like that, giving yourself a little bit of a buffer will save you an awful lot of heartache later on when you realize you've overdone something or overcooked inside of a building or around a mountaintop or something like that. So yes, if you can shift as much data as you can across to the brighter part of the histogram when you're recording it, you'll get a better result. You will get a better data set to be able to process afterwards. But be really careful that you don't overcook it, because if you do, unlike with a shadow, there is no recovery from a blown highlight.
No, and then that could be the end of a picture, really.
Yeah.
And the only other, picking around on this picture was obviously this one. There's a car there. Was that the selfie stick car? I can't remember.
That was the selfie stick car.
Possibly, or another selfie stick car. So just healing out some of that stuff, because unfortunately, everyone has a right to be there, I suppose, so we can grumble about cars being out on the salt, but, that's the way it is. And then really the mountains treated as a separate layer, just to pull out a bit more shadows from it. And I believe that was created, if I can remember, just by using the magic brush, I think. So if I just do a little quick magic brush swipe there, yeah, so it can pick up most of that really and add a few bits in if I need to. Just to open up the shadows a little bit more. I mean, it was backlit obviously, so there's not going to be tons of light falling on there, but it just helped to open that slightly. So
yeah,
cool. Shall we? You can tell a story now, Paul, if you want.
Okay.
Or do you want me to tell another story?
No, it's all right. We'll cover a few. So this is Chicago. So the night actually that David was editing the following morning on the plane. So rooftop shot, and there's a couple of things in here that the whole point of this session was to talk about the reason for editing a little bit later. So when you are on top of a building in a city, the temptation is always to go massively wide. My temptation is as well, and everyone always, because you want to get in the view, and that's great. So a few things with cities specifically. Number one, be careful with brands. So it doesn't matter what brand it is. In this case, it's a very obvious brand. I think by design, brand. Strangely. But let's look at it this way. This limits the ability for me to use that image for other purposes, for example. So it may be that, and it doesn't have to be a person or a brand or whatever. It can be something, but just be aware of what's in that portal, because especially if you're going to be going wide, you might, and I've got a choice here. I could rub out the logo. I could, crop the logo. I can leave the logo in, but then I'm relatively niche in terms of where that's going to be attractive to. So cities, absolutely look at wide, but I would always also shoot slightly more intimate images. So for instance, this sort of shot, if we're dealing with, a company that wants to talk about cityscape and downtown, as it were, or riverfront, this works. I don't need that massive, great big wide view. And what I also avoid then is things like this roof paraphernalia here down the bottom left, because I'm so wide.
A long time obsessing about
trying to get rid of,
which in actual fact it didn't make much difference.
No. Other things to bear in mind at night specifically, and things that you will not see on the camera, and arguably you won't see when you're in a hurry. If you get your image up, and I didn't notice this, funnily enough, when I first saw it. So there's the image actually that I settled on. Doesn't have any branding in the right. It does have some branding in the distance. for a small CRM company. So there's stuff in here that sort of works as a city shot. What doesn't work, and what I didn't even notice at the time, was this lens flare over here, because it's relatively subtle. And I think from memory, it was coming off of that silver signage and whatever. It was bouncing some light back at the camera. So we've got a lens flare here, a load of streaks and lines across here. Funnily enough, another one up here that I didn't even realize until David and I were talking today. So in order to fix that, I haven't done that in Capture One, and it's one thing that we're not precious about. So Capture One is great for editing raw data to the point of effectively think about the whole image with some minor tweaks to subjects. When we start talking about having to rebuild content, and here we are, I've got to build the stuff that was behind that streak there. I've got to build the stuff that was behind these colors and these diagonals here. I'm going to take that out to a pixel editor. And it doesn't really matter which one you use. Most of them now are capable of doing content-aware fill, but you end up with a much, much, much cleaner image as a result of doing that. So this hasn't, that cleanup has not been done in Capture One. Open season for that discussion. I'm going to actually, ironically, have to go back in and fix this bit now that I've seen it and it's bugging me. But that lens flare here, there is no way on earth I would have caught that on the screen. There is no, and even zooming in at night, the screen is quite bright. It's changing your vision. You're going to struggle to see that on the laptop when we loaded it up initially, because, and interestingly, it's a human thing. I'm looking at my subjects, which is, are these buildings sharp? I'm looking in the windows. Can we see all the detail in here? And yes, I can. That's kind of spooky and slightly concerning. But all of that stuff is what I'm looking at, and I'm not necessarily looking at the peripheral. This only flagged to me when I looked at it on a big screen back at base a few weeks later and just went, we need to fix that. And at that point, it's too late to fix. So, sorry, it's too late to fix in the camera. Should we talk trains?
Yeah,
possibly. Yeah, let's go full geek, because I've never shot trains before.
Turns out, and never will again.
Never will again. So it turns out that trains, despite being what I thought completely symmetrical, when they're on a slightly sloping ground and when they're on a corner, they turn out to be not quite symmetrical when you shoot straight down the track. So you end up with the left-hand side visible just in there and not the right-hand side. So my initial thought, again, when we were out there in the moment, was I wanted this big head-on view of the train. Shot that lots and lots of times with a 32mm from on my phase one camera. So it was actually the tilt shift lens we were testing at the time. Does a great job in terms of focus. In terms of detail forward to back, it's pretty much on there. But it's not actually level. And if you're going to do something geometrically level and symmetrical, it's got to be symmetrical. So again, this was stuff that I thought we would use this sort of version. Turns out, and then actually shifting to the side, great, I've got a sun flare. Turns out that sun flare on a big screen is pretty ugly. So quickly, I'm glad, not by accident, but as luck would have it, I happened to shoot from a low angle across to the side. So it's one where, if I look in retrospect, and it's a mistake I see a lot of people make, which is when they get to their edit a few days, few weeks later, or whatever else, quite often you'll get the, if only I'd shot from here or from there or whatever. When you're out there, do that. We weren't necessarily restricted with this thing. You had the engine running, which was quite concerning, but, he didn't seem to have an intention to kill either of us. But, my intention completely, the whole time we were there, was to use this style of shot, just completely geometrically symmetrical. It doesn't work. This one does. And while we're at it, we talked about it, touching on it. So that's a shot out of my phase one camera. So that's 151 megapixel. This is the shot out of my iPhone, which is 48 megapixel. It's a DNG. Funnily enough, I can copy every one of these adjustments out of my big camera, as it were, and apply them, apart from the healing brush, because there were no dust spots on my iPhone, annoyingly from the other one. But we can apply the exact same adjustments. So on here is a deep sky adjustment layer. On there is actually a graduated filter with a reduction in brightness down the bottom. That's the same adjustments, as I have on my big image. So the adoption now, which Capture One has, of mobile formats, so you can now bring in raw mobile formats into Capture One. It comes in as a DNG. That DNG reads all the data, and you can apply every single alteration that you made to the full or big image, as it were, to that DNG. And ironically, as we discovered earlier, it did get it more geometrically correct on the phone than it did on my big camera. So still trying to process that one. But so in terms of the adjustments, I think the days of the phone is a good reference are going to be there for a long, long time. I would always encourage people to do it. Use the phone as a reference for the pictures that you're taking.
Yeah,
and we'll cover some of that later on, because it actually becomes really important. And a couple of shots we're going to show you. But the days of it just being a reference tool are very much over. The quality of the images that come out of these phones now, I mean, that's a phone image. It's a 48 megapixel phone image at this point, but it's clean. There's no banding. There's no compression. It's a raw file out of a phone. It's done an epic job of what is actually a very high contrast scene. You know, huge dynamic range issues between the darks of the tracks and the reflections coming off of this train. You know, do I prefer my big version of it? Of course I do. And if I look at the detail on it, you know, it's up there. But this is pretty good too. So genuinely, you know, absolutely do take pictures as reference on your phone, but also maybe consider taking some backup pictures on it too, just in case.
You never know. Yeah, I mean, see, I shot loads of trains as well. Haven't edited any. Well,
Such a geek.
Sort of edited that as well, but you know, actually, my favourite train shot was the
side on,
the side on with the Sultan, more geometrical. But yeah, I thought obviously in my head, oh yeah, it's going to be a super awesome head-on shot, but yeah, it's not. So, whereas
so shoot around, because you never know when you go to edit it, you'll look at the shot that you thought was the winner, and you can regret or live to regret the fact that you didn't shoot more different angles.
Don't know what I was thinking there. So, rock. Yeah. So yes, exactly. Sorry, let's go back to your screen. Definitely, but yeah, and I've learned to. I'm still forget, but you know, having that phone reference shot is actually really good for location, because we went to loads of different places. Oh, where was that? You know, find the equivalent phone shot, and
it's a lot quicker to search for locations in your Photos app than it is through every single catalog or session that you've ever done.
Oh, question for Ricante. Why doesn't Captron have a profile for the iPhone? Well, that changed today, actually, because now that you can shoot with this, there's actually a now camera app inside Capture One Mobile on here. So you can actually open Capture One Mobile and shoot directly. And yes, then there's a better profile for the iPhone as well. So
prior to that, to the question that I guess was being asked is because if you look here on the left-hand side, so it uses a standard DNG. It does pull in this tone-mapped approach. So rather than the default, it's doing some clever stuff behind the scenes. But up until today, it's only possible to use the standard DNG. Going forward, it's now going to map it into the iPhone itself.
Yeah, cool.
So another one for back of camera screen and reasons for editing a bit later on when you've got a bit more retail space on your real estate space. Sorry, not retail space. On your screen is when we're looking at detail. So in this case, I wanted just a very bleak open field with a couple of clouds. We got lucky with a couple of clouds or a few clouds. I wanted them to move. Great. Annoyingly, they didn't move enough. So these are what I call smudges. I prefer streaks over smudges, but pretty good. And 138 mil on my camera. So that's about a 80-ish mil equivalent. Thought I'd done pretty well. And actually, as I sort of looked in, you know, all of this, of course, is going to be moving because it's over a long exposure, but everything else looked pretty good until I got into there. And when I looked at that and compared it to the still single shot, there we are miles off. And the difference being, frankly, wind. We were stuck there.
Yeah, it was super windy that day, wasn't it?
Yeah, so, you know, long lens, over a long exposure, you're going to get wind. Now, you're going to get wind issues. That's still not better. So for me, I don't like this because it's almost too barren, too sparse. With this, with the clouds, it sort of worked, but with this, I can't really use it. So luckily, again, shot a vertical version. Great. Ooh, nice clouds too. I like that one too. Problem, as it turns out, what's good for horizontal is good for vertical as well. It's still blurry. It's not as blurry, but it's still not great. So I'm then into this place with the single shot. So again, in my head, I had a really clear view, which is I wanted a nice long exposure. I wanted the clouds to streak across the sky. I wanted that whole sort of empty feeling of this old shed in the distance with all the grass in front. This one is nice and sharp, wonderful. But I'm having to sacrifice my streaky clouds. Now, to be fair, they weren't streaky enough. They, as I say, they're what I'd call smudges. But more importantly, I can't have an image where the subject is blurry. It's ridiculous. And we can go through certain things in Capture One. Structure helps a lot, so I can press that, but it's fake sharpness, frankly. Same with clarity, that would help. I can go into the sharpening tool and we just reduce our radius and threshold, so it's nice and tight. Is that better than before? Absolutely, yes, it is. But is it better than that? No. So, sometimes what you have in your head when you're out there in the field, and even when you first go to edit, doesn't really match up to maybe where you end up. And again, the reason, whenever someone shoots a long exposure, please, 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 at the beginning and the end, shoot 2 short exposures. So you've got them as backups. And this was literally a backup shot. This was my test shot ready for a long exposure. Turns out it's the one that I'm probably going to use. And spoiler alert, there were more clouds.
Yeah, and I remember you had it in your head very specifically that it had to be a long exposure and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, at the end of the day, that again, trying to take that emotional attachment out from an idea.
Exactly. The temptation is at that point in time, you're sat there in a place of, I will make this work. Because I had that in my head. That's the shot that I wanted. So I could sit there with that long exposure and I could use all the structure tools, the sharpening tools, and try and recover it. But when you take a breath, so come away, been away for 6 weeks from that setup, come back to it and you think, actually, what's the better image? What's the better print? And it's not the one that you had in mind because there's too much wrong with it.
No, exactly. So,
do you want to switch to your storytelling screen?
Yes.
Or do you want me to add some more? We've got lots more. But
we've got lots more. I can tell a story, another story similar to this story, I guess. So this was the Hayden Valley, right? I think I've got the name right, haven't I? Let's just clone that.
Oh yes, yeah, it is.
Yeah. And this is actually, it's different to this story in that this one was pretty, miserable out of camera, whereas this one is, if I reset it 1 second, it's still a little bit flat and lifeless in terms of the color potential that we could. Oh, I had reset that one. Hang on, this one. A little bit flat and lifeless out of the color potential we could get from it. But what was frustrating about this experience was when you drive through the Hayden Valley, it looks pretty impressive almost from every angle that you look at it when you're driving, looking out the window. Look at that view, look at that view, look at that view. How easy it will be to take a picture from this spectacular place. But you messed around quite a lot at the side of the road. I messed around quite a lot at the side of the road as well, and had kind of almost resigned myself not to even bother looking at this one. But it actually, after editing, came out quite nicely.
There's a bit of a handy giveaway for photographers, by the way. If you see a photographer, I would say as a rough guide, if they've moved 3 times or more, and if they've changed lens 3 times or more, they're struggling.
Yes, and there was a lot of that going on, really, to be fair. But again, this doesn't need much editing. There's a danger of doing silly things like that because the sun was over here somewhere, wasn't it? It was just popping up over this hill. So obviously this isn't going to be lit, but we want to see a little bit more in there. And
that's the thing. If you flatten it too much, what makes that image work in theory is its contrast. So you've
Yeah,
got contrast
exactly.
between the light mist, the light sky, and the dark hills. The second you flatten that contrast and
Yeah,
cartoon it,
it's no,
you've lost it. It's a drawing.
it's no fun. So without a great deal of fiddling around and not spending, an inordinate amount of time on it, you can actually get something quite nice. So yeah, again, a good lesson. Don't psychologically disregard the stuff you thought was poor at the outset. I mean, there
Well,
is.
you were going to delete that morning.
Yeah, it's like just forget about it. Yeah, I think because we'd driven through it the day before or something like that, and I had grand expectations of just being able to hold the camera out the window without looking, and just get any shot. No, I think that was the sad part of it.
Yeah.
Question actually that I saw pop up. Raymond was asking 1/250th of a second is long exposure. So hold that thought. When we get
Yeah,
back
we'll
to
cover
look at
that.
your shot, we'll cover that because the way the
Yeah,
phase one operates in a certain mode with long exposure is a little bit different.
bit different.
Yeah. There was also a question along a couple of iPhone things to clarify DNG. So Howard was asking, will it support Android DNG? Yes. So if you have a DNG which adheres to, I think it's standard, don't quote me on this, 1.6, where you have an additional what's called a tone map embedded into the file, which is something the camera creates. Then Capture One will read that tone map and then display you close to how it looks on your phone
I was
screen
going to
with
say,
colors
to
and
be
so on.
clear, without that tone map, it will still read the DNG, but it's going to look
Yeah,
dark and dingy and horrible.
yeah, without the tone map, you might have to do a little bit more pulling around yourself, and you might
Yeah.
find that automatic things like camera, the camera, whether it's iPhone, Google Pixel, or whatever, will probably go a bit over the top in terms of lifting shadows, compressing highlights, and maybe boosting saturation and so on. So you will get that look on screen. But of course, if it's a RAW file, you can then tailor it to your needs, which is the whole beauty of it. And another question, what was it? Is there much difference between iPhone 12 Pro and the soon-to-be published 15 Pro? Well, we don't know anything about the 15 because that's
3.
obviously a big secret. But 3, yeah. But in terms of technical prowess, I don't know
I,
how much
I would
personally.
say there's almost a sort of a given here, which is with every single release of the iPhone, certainly on the Pro versions, the
Yes,
camera has leapt forward each time.
yeah. Less
I
so on the
was
non-Pro, yeah.
Yeah, I was sort of in a place of the upgrade for the 14 Pro for me was more incremental from the 13 Pro. That said, it does do some really clever things with the camera, and the fact that I can actually now pull up a 48 meg DNG, which is perfectly usable actually as a
Yeah.
photograph for print, is a big move forward. What comes later on this evening, have to wait and see. But in general terms, with each version comes a new incremental upgrade, and the longer you leave it in terms of those versions, the more of a difference you're going to see. I think people that upgrade every time don't notice the differences quite so much, but actually if you look back, there's quite a staggering leap.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Cool. All right. Um, and I know that was a fairly hasty edit, but I hope that shows that, when I hear people saying, oh, I spent an hour editing this picture or something, it's often really not necessary. And it can just be, a few quick tweaks. If I was going to print this, then I would study it much more carefully. Just make sure if there's anything I wanted to get rid of, maybe tweak the sky a little bit more. But in terms of being able to go from, that to that, doesn't take, a whole lot of effort really. I mean, because of Capture One, of course, but it doesn't need to be a stressful exercise. Right, what do we got?
Do you want to swap across?
Yeah,
I'm thinking I'm going to cover 3 things quickly, just so that we've got them covered
good.
early on, just in case we end up running through. So, this one, when do we give up on an image? There's a fun one. It sounds very depressing,
Yeah.
and it's in this scenario. So, I'll tell you exactly why. So, number one, this is pretty. There's tiny little tweaks to this, but it's pretty much, it's a color tweak and a bit of lifting of shadows. This is the single shot. I think to answer, was it Ray that asked the question about long exposure?
Yes. Somebody, sorry, Ray, if it wasn't you.
If you look at the bottom of the EXIF data, this is a 1/30th of a second shot, which is weird because the clouds must be moving at supersonic speed. This is also a 1/30th of a second shot. These are actually taken at the same time, roughly. This was actually my pre-shot for this one. What the Phase 1 camera does, and it's on Phase 1's medium format back, something called the IQ4 platform and above, so ever since the IQ4 and going forward, is something called frame averaging. So here, this is a 30th of a second. This is that 30th of a second shot recorded thousands of times over 7 minutes. And in camera, it's joining all of those shots together, averaging them out, so the mean average of the data all the way across each of those shots. Basically, think of it like it's bundling lots of teacups into buckets and then working out the average of each bucket for each pixel. So it's literally that, frame averaging. So what it means is that I've got the ability to stop that exposure at any point in time, because it doesn't matter whether I've recorded 500 frames, 1,000 frames, 3 frames. The exposure was the same. It's just about how long I've captured it for, so I can stop it and it doesn't have any effect on exposure. The second thing it does is, because noise is by definition random, it means that my shadows are relatively noise-free, because over those averages of all those different frames, the noise kind of cancels itself out. So we get some huge image benefits from it. But that's why at the bottom you're seeing 1/30th of a second when clearly this wasn't. It was a 30th of a second times many thousands of frames over 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So the reason that this isn't going to make a print, and it's actually a really detailed reason in here. This is my single shot. I'm not a fan. It works. It's got a nice reflection, but it's not particularly dynamic to me. It just feels a little bit pedestrian. It feels a bit phony, as in phone shot-y. But what I do have in here, and we talked about it when we were out there, are some individuals. One there, one here, and one here. And when they are still on a very fast shot, well, we can delete them pretty easily, because I can go into this vegetation. We can put in a pixel editor. I wouldn't recommend trying the healing brush on here. It will give it a go within Capture One, but you're in a content fill sort of space here, really, for this sort of stuff. But I can use the sharp leaves, and I could replace this person with some water background. Great. But overall, I'm not a fan of the shot. I am more of a fan of this shot and this shot. But here's the problem. Not only is the sky moving and the reflection in the water moving, but also the people are moving. Funnily enough, there's a bit of a heel layer on here, where I tried in Capture One to remove him, but it's getting messy. Even if I were to replace this person, I'm left with moving leaves, which aren't actually that pleasant to look at. So I've got the other person. So I think I cropped him out, actually, the other ghost. But even if I were to fix this, what do I do with these leaves? Even if there'll be people that say, well, you could blend the previous leaf. This one here. The problem with that is I'm literally going to be in the place of cutting out leaves, because I can't use the background from this one, because it's not the smooth, soft, long exposure background. And the exposure itself is different. This was taken at a different time to this one. So I start then creating an image that never existed. And I'm not a fan of that.
And it would be an enormous amount of work to try.
A huge amount of work for something that actually, it's a nice enough shot, but it's not going to do anything massive for me. So to me, there is a point where, and again, it goes back to that thing in my head. This was the one I was going to edit. This is the one I wanted to use. This was a print. When it gets down to the practicality of it, I may have a little go at it, but if it's starting to take too long, it's going to be a walk away. And I walk away from shots sometimes. They just don't work, or or more importantly, the edit won't work in a realistic way. So it's just not gonna fly.
No.
Quickly, we may come back to some of these, but quickly scrolling through to an example here. So again, another one. Out in the field, we thought this was going to be the shot that we used, because this is what happened to the sky that morning. Pretty nice. And actually, as time went on, so let's reference back to taking iPhone shots. So we'll often do this. And actually, here's a fun one. One of the reasons, so the primary reason for me taking iPhone shots of the scene that I'm taking is as a reference. Because I leave it so long before editing, I need to be able to go back and visually remember what it was, but that phone shot sort of helps as a prompt. So I use these as prompts to what I'm going to edit back to, because the raw data, as we said, isn't always going to match it. The problem is that that's not the only reason I do it now. The problem now is because so much is hyper edited and hyper faked, we now use these as demonstration shots for, no, that is what it looked like. And that's pretty sad that we're at that place, but there we go. So this is the iPhone shot of that scene. Now that scene, I wasn't planning on using. In my head, I was all about this color in the sky. And I might use it. We might edit that going forward. But the better shot out of that morning was this one. And I'd actually discarded this shot in the first place and actually planned on not using any of these. We're going to use the earlier ones. So again, it's that whole process of let's go back to the series of images that I shot from that morning when I'm not in the mindset of how did that morning look. Because I can tell you now for a fact, the second I got back to our hotel, I was only looking at this. The others were dead to me. Because this is what I remembered as this was the moment when I went, yes, we finally got the sky that we wanted. Yes, we can make this work. On a print, on a wall, this one's going to be a lot easier for me to work through with designers. So again, don't discard anything. And actually, it's another reason for maybe do a quick edit on the one that you really like, but go back to the whole lot. Don't just focus on the one that you really like. Don't go back to just that one and keep editing and editing it. When you have time and space, go back to the whole series and just look. Maybe one of the ones later on was actually the better shot.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Yeah, if you have that emotional attachment to that, the one
you're blinkered. You don't look at other stuff. And today, for fun, we're going to talk about a time when I was an idiot. Because that's fun.
Which is a rare admission. A very rare admission.
It never happens. But it did on this one. So for those of you that followed us when we were out between Chicago and Wyoming and so on, you will know that we went up in the air and shot Grand Prismatic Spring, which is the, frankly, phenomenal natural geothermal landscape of Yellowstone. And of course, that's not a cheap activity to do. So of course, you're all prepped. We've got polarizing filters to put on the front of the camera because you are shooting in direct light, certainly bouncing back off the water. So that's important. We planned on, we had the exact height that the helicopter needed to be at based on our lenses because we had the field of view. So we knew exactly where we needed to be. Flight plan all sorted already, and I took with me a completely inappropriate camera to shoot with, which was the XT camera from Phase 1, which is the technical version of their camera system. So it's a field camera with 138mm lens. I have no image stabilization. I don't even have a shutter button. I have to trigger the shutter from the screen. My focus is a manual focus ring, and at the same time, it weighs quite a ton. So all of those things in mind, we got in the helicopter and we got up high. Nice. And on the way out to Yellowstone, we started just doing some quick test shots to make sure everything's sharp. And yeah, that's looking pretty sharp. So you can go into 200%. So we can be really sure, yeah, that's nice and sharp there. From a moving helicopter, that's pretty good. And on my little LCD screen, I'm thinking that's nice and crisp. So off we go. And then because I've confirmed that it's sharp, so I just do a couple more checks here and yeah, that's nice and sharp all the way around this, whatever that weird pool of bright green gunk is. Let's not ask questions. It's certainly well hidden. But what I didn't notice on my little LCD screen...
shall we see if anyone else notices?
We can do.
We give you 15 seconds and we'll ask a question which two people asked, Jeff P. and also someone in the live stream room. What do you do with all these pictures? Do they just live on the hard drive, print, share on social media? I mean, me and Paul, it's two different uses. For me, it's for company reasons, for Capture One reasons, for gathering raw files, making content, live stream content, using them for testing forthcoming features, hint, hint, and all kinds of stuff. So I always need a constant supply of raw files. Obviously, buying raw files, if I went to any photographer, any of you guys watching, and I said,
We're
hey,
expensive.
yeah, can you give me 100 raw files, please, where I'm allowed to use it any way I want and publish it anywhere and edit it any way you want and so on. You know, that's not feasible. So it's actually far more economically viable to, you know, shoot them myself. Obviously, we do get raw files in from other photographers as well, but when I need quantity, it makes more sense for me to do it. But for Paul, it's obviously for commercial reasons too.
Yeah, I mean, so we've got a couple of things. So first off, you have what we would consider B-roll content, so or B-grade, let's call it that content. So we've got the images that are absolutely the one that I wanted, and that will be released as a print. But beyond that, you then get a request in from someone who wants to, whatever, commercially license something. I don't really want to sell them the image that we offer as a print, as a limited edition. So we'll offer them a similar image taken from a similar place, similar time or whatever, but it may not have the same edit and so on. So we've got that as a backup. Equally, I released a print in June that I shot in 2016. So when we talk about gaps of editing, that one's probably pretty up there. But what it was is it triggered. So I was looking at something and I was like, actually, I remember those shots from that location. Let me go back to them. And ones that I'd originally discarded. The other thing to bear in mind is our taste as photographers changes as well. So, you know, from 7 years ago, an image that I didn't like at the time, now my taste has changed to the point that I do. So yes, the answer is they all get kept. I have huge storage bills, frankly, and it's on the basis that one day I may need it, or more importantly, one day I may choose to go back and play. Anyone guessed yet? No.
Someone said banding, so not the right answer. No,
close. Similar issue. So,
yeah,
modern cameras, and this is actually a massive one for people to get in their head. And please do not make the mistake that I did initially up there. You have two options for your shutter quite often on a modern, certainly mirrorless camera. One is to use the mechanical shutter, and the other is to use the electronic shutter. The electronic shutter being a rolling shutter, because it cannot physically read out the whole sensor at one time. So it reads it line by line, very fast, maybe up to 125th of a second. But here's the problem. I want to shoot at 1,000th of a second to keep things nice and sharp, because we are in a fast-moving helicopter. And the faster the helicopter moves, the faster the subject is moving during the period that sensor is reading out from top to bottom when it's in electronic shutter mode. I'd left my camera by accident on ES mode. I can't remember why. I'd had something previously. And if you look, this is what's called rolling shutter. So these trees are obviously not wavy. It wasn't that windy. If you want to see a really bad example of it, have a look at this one when we went a bit faster. So that is the result of the sensor. It doesn't matter that I'm at 1,000th of a second. That's the theoretical shutter speed, but it can only read out at, in most cases, about 125th of a second across that shutter, or slower. So you're in an unfortunate position where if you are using your electronic shutter, which in a lot of cameras will refer to it as silent shooting. So just be careful with that. Silent
quite
shooting
often
sounds like
on by default.
On by default, yeah. So
well.
it sounds like it's the gift that keeps on giving, and it's the only positive. It's great because it does everything that you want. Careful, this can be the result if you are moving fast and trying to capture motion, or trying to still motion. And stop motion. This can be the result. So this is a problem for cameras. If you're going slower, you won't notice it. Helicopter speed getting somewhere, you really will. And yeah, we get nice bendy stuff like this. So if you see this on your images, it is probably that you've got the electronic shutter version or option turned on, or the silent shooting option. They will do the same thing. You want to switch ideally to the physical shutter that you should have the option for in your camera.
That's particularly good, that one, isn't it? Yeah.
That one's a full on. I mean, it actually makes the pilot look bad, I would argue. But so yeah, hands up. That was a what's going on here? Whoa. Okay. Now, when it comes to the spring itself, and I know some of you will have seen the edits that both David and I did for this, but a couple of things. So, number one, so in our heads, we were going to go full on ground prismatic middle. That's what I opted for. David's got a different version of it, and we'll cover that in a second. But one thing to bear in mind is the colors that come from using polarizers, and I'm going to refer you to this bit here. So, this is ground prismatic from two different angles. And you get two different color bases. And the reason being because the light's reflecting differently through the polarizer. So you can tweak that in Capture One, but again, it's one way you want to get it ideally right in camera. The bit that I did differently later, so this is something where genuinely both David and I were in a place of, let's get these edited immediately because they're cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is actually the basis of my print, which turned out like this. So that this image comes from this image. And you'll see that it's been twisted a little bit and it's been manipulated a little bit in terms of its shape. And the reason why, and before anyone goes, ooh, you've changed the shape of ground prismatic. No, I've reset the shape of ground prismatic. And the reason that we've done that is because we are shooting not directly down. We're shooting at slightly oblique angles.
Because we'd fall out the helicopter.
Otherwise, it becomes a little bit dangly. Now, what you can use, and this is what, so I talked to David about this when I was doing it at the time, and it was kind of that's a bit weird, but it works. So here is my shot of ground prismatic. How did I make sure that this is matching the actual ground prismatic? Well, I used Google Maps. So here is the Google Map version of ground prismatic. Bear in mind the actual spring changes over time, so there will be slight variations in terms of the geology around it. But there's the Google version. There is the Google version stretched to match the actual size of mine. And here is the overlay. So this is the Google version on the right, the satellite version. And this on the left is my print. And what I'm doing is I'm manipulating my image through keystone, through crop, through rotation, all of that stuff, so that it matches the correct shape of what is seen directly from above. And obviously a satellite image is looking straight down. So that's why I'm in a place of I'm confident that this one and this one, even though there's been some change over time, and you can see, look down here, these sort of fingers that come out have changed a little bit. This thing has grown here from where it used to be before.
Yeah, quite a bit.
But we're checking things like the path and stuff like that. What is cool is it also helps you appreciate the fact that we've got a lot more detail than Google Earth. But in broad terms, that was actually, to me, really important. I didn't want to be in a place where I've manipulated and rotated and changed the orientation of ground prismatic without being true to what it was. That couldn't have been done on the laptop. That needed some time.
That's not something you would have knocked out on the plane or whatever.
No.
So, no.
So yeah, there's some life lessons. Rolling shutter, be careful with that, genuinely. And I know this is about editing after the effect, or after the event, but please get that right when you're actually shooting, because you can't. There is no way on earth you are going to be editing that correctly. No. So, there we go. Over to you, Mr. Grover.
Yeah. So carrying on with that theme, I didn't get Google Maps out and rotate it and do a nicer job and all that other stuff. However, what was interesting though is that the out of camera result was quite dull,
really flat,
flat. But we don't really have an explanation for that.
Well, it was on yours, and we're not playing camera bingo and whatever. But funnily enough, the raw on mine was actually as vibrant as it should have been. On David's, it seemed to almost flatten it. It was almost like using a linear response curve.
Yeah, I'll just check I haven't got anything weird going on in where have I put my base characteristics? I don't know.
The theory we got to earlier was that maybe the camera looks at it and thinks, no, that's way too colourful to be real, so I'm going to dull it down.
Exactly, surely, yeah. So we're on pro standard profile, but again, it's not, there's very little detail, tonal range going on here, which, may just explain it to some extent. So with not a lot of tweaks, more about auto levels and anything else, 2 clicks, we're a lot closer and with some clarity. And I think I got rid of some little specks and other stuff like that when I was fiddling around with. But why I wanted to show this one was because I made the mistake of editing this in a dingy hotel room, I think, because it seems the modern way of lighting hotel rooms is moody.
16 lights and none of them actually do anything.
Exactly, and you can't find your socks in your suitcase and so on. Just showing my age, probably. But yeah, I edited it in a moodily lit hotel room, and you can actually go to my Instagram, plug Instagram, and see
the original.
See the original, and it was it was way too dark. It was really dingy and
to help
just
with that,
flat.
The one thing, and it's actually really sad because, frankly, because less and less people are printing, less and less people do this, but it is really important. If you are planning on ever printing something, but more importantly, you can't control the brightness of people's screens.
No.
But what you can control is your image's comparison to white. So Capture One has a proofing margin, which David's going to turn on now.
What do we go for? Oh, the proofing.
White. Yeah, I want the proof margin up. There we go.
Yeah.
And then go full screen.
Yeah, and what we can also do is get rid of the labels if you want that, or we can go full screen.
So this will give me a view of, are my brightest parts of my image really bright? Are my darkest parts of my image really dark? Looking at things on a black background, we've gotten used to it now as consumers of screen content. But actually, then quite often you go and print it, and it's, oh, that's a lot darker than I was expecting. Well, yeah, because a piece of paper isn't backlit. So use the proofing margin, set it to white, because that's your real baseline for how bright the brightest parts can be. And that will give you a view of, is it too dark or not? And the issue of, so here's the thing, if you're in a hotel room that's very dark, or your own room that's very dark, and you pull up that white border, all of a sudden you're going to go, wow, that hurts my eyes, but wow, my image is dark.
Yeah, it really does help with that.
Yeah.
And I'm just clipping, that's why. I was just cutting out the bit of the red channel from that bit. So yeah, always keep an eye on what's going on with the output histogram, because as soon as it was clipping, then we were starting to lose. Might not have really ended up as anything in the print or whatever, but best to be on the safe side.
As a general tip, if you're going to play with levels, first turn on your exposure warning.
Yeah.
So that will give you a bit of a hint as to whether you start seeing the red areas start to creep in. That's telling you that you're pushing those. Yeah, you're pushing them a bit far. A little bit you can get away with, but too much, that's going to be a problem. So turn the warning on. It'll help you.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, always this one in particular, when I was editing for print, white background. Suddenly everything looks very different to working with a black background for sure. Yeah. Good sense. Cool. How are we doing for time? We're nearly.
You're nearly done. There's a question.
We've got a few questions to.
I just saw one from Ricanto about changing the curve in the base characteristics panel. I always leave it on auto. When you change it, can you give me an idea? So auto on the curve, depending on the camera that you have. So you've got a base characteristics area, which David's going to click and load up. Depending on your camera. So if you have a Fuji camera, and I think some Nikon cameras, it will load in the auto. If you've got a film simulation, it will load that into the curve. If you do not, and it's not loading in your film simulations, auto is basically the default to film standard. It's the same thing. Film standard and auto are the same thing. So your auto curve basically is not raw. That's the killer. The spoiler alert, because that ruins people's lives when they discover this. When you import your images into Capture One and it uses the auto curve, you are not looking at raw data. It may be a raw file, but it is not raw. If you want to see as close to raw data as you can get, you need to switch that to say linear response. The auto curve or film standard actually builds in a little S curve into the import to deliver what it thinks, or what Capture One has worked through in general, is the right amount of pop to make the image look more like what you will have remembered. If you want to go back to raw, or you've got a challenging image with really bright highlights and dark shadows and stuff like that with dynamic range issues, that boost might push it too far. So go to linear response, and that will give you the ability to do the work from there, with the warning that you will be doing all the work from there.
Yes,
so there's no contrast in it.
It's quite often we hear the story, I edit everything on linear response. Please don't, because you're just giving yourself extra work most of the time.
I see a lot of people turn it on linear response and then edit it to get it back to what auto would have been.
Yeah.
So test them, put your mouse through them and just give them a little go.
Yeah, exactly. Probably a long answer to a question. The pros and cons of using ND filters versus frame averaging. Whilst you were chatting, I dug up paulreiffer.com and blog, and
Yeah,
so
we've got
there's
a
a couple
thing
of
about it.
couple of
No, there's a
posts on
whole.
this one.
Yes, there you go. The
Yeah.
complete guide. There you go.
So I'd read that because there are differences between
Yeah.
ND filters and frame averaging, and I'm sure you discuss the difference between those and
We
the
do.
pros and cons and all of that. So paulreiffer.com and then /blog, and then have a
The
look at that.
the real mess with your mind one is that I sometimes use an ND filter with frame averaging.
Oh, there we go. That's excuse me. That's a head mash. That's right.
But I think so. In terms of today's session, that the plan was to go through sort of where we've edited since being away, and I think it's fair to say every single picture that you've seen today is not the edit that we did at the time. It is the one that we've either revisited or looked at fresh more recently.
Yes. Yeah.
I would genuinely encourage everyone, absolutely, if you're desperate to go and edit the image because you're excited or you've got a client or whatever and it needs to be done, absolutely do that.
Sure.
Then put it away and come back in a month or a couple of weeks even. But it'll give you a different outlook on the images that you've shot, and you'll start looking at them as pictures rather than as memories.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That changes the way you do it.
Yeah, because this one has changed, and I'm still not happy with it. This one has changed from that to that to that. It's like, and I'm still not sure what I'm doing. So yeah, and very different to how it looked. Straight out of camera, definitely. So yeah, very true, very, very true.
One other question I've just seen on there, Prasad's just asked, traditionally in Capture One you get around 4 minor releases with new features. So far there have only been 2 minor releases for 23. Will there be more?
Hang on, just reading your question. So what are we on? We are on 16.2.4. So there's been 4 minors, 2 majors since 16. If I cast my mind back to 22, I can't actually remember. Well, I think generally it was around 3 dot releases, 3 to 4 dot releases per year. What I am going to suggest you do, Prasad, is this. So if I just go to this page. Oh, sorry, Paul, I've
no, you're good.
cut you off.
I remember. I saw this as well. This is good.
You're still in the background. So if you wave your camera at this QR code, or Helen, if you catch me chatting, you can paste the link in the chat as well. If you want to get access to, as it says, offers, discounts, latest updates, we do have some new stuff coming actually pretty soon. There was a question earlier. What did it say? Any AI masking updates? We shall see. Maybe. I mean, we've said for quite some time that we're going to be doing that. So I'd say sign up, and then this way you'll be the first to know when stuff is dropping.
The other one to think about as well is obviously, so if you go into your account on Capture One, you can apply to be part of the beta program.
So exactly.
Now, with a warning,
Yeah.
do not use that in production. And I'll repeat, do not ever use that in production. If you ever complain that all of your things have gone missing because you're on a beta, well, that's part of it.
Yeah.
The whole point of this is to get early access to see stuff, test stuff, but also for Capture One to get feedback on things that do and don't work. And that means sometimes it doesn't work. And that's the whole point of a beta. Yeah. So sign up. You can get early access to some features, but please do it on a mirror of your work rather than your actual work.
Exactly. And it's just the URL is just the short one is capture1.com/beta. And then that way you'll see it. So definitely would recommend that. And as I said, 16.2.4 did drop today. So you can also update, couple of new lenses support, couple of new camera support, bug fixes, of course, as well. And support for the iPhone as a tethered capture device, but you do need Capture One mobile for that because we have to access obviously the camera and so on and so forth to get through to that.
Which you can get if you're in the all-in-one deal.
Yes, exactly. exactly.
There you go. I'll just do your job for you there, David.
Thank you. Good plug. Just checking that. Where's the proof margin located? It's up here, James.
Yeah.
This button here.
It's also in your view menu.
Yeah.
If you don't use the button.
Customize viewer, proof margin. I've got shortcut X, so it's easy to tap that on and off. You can also in settings change. What's it under? It's under appearance, I think. The proof margin size. So if you want a really fat one, you can, or you can just adjust it depending on whether you're working full screen with the thumbnails browser up and so on. So you can also tweak that to your heart's content as well. Checking the question. What if you use mechanical and electronic shutter together? I think most cameras will work in a hybrid mode where depending on the shutter speed, it will go one to the other. Read your instruction manual. I often see a lot of people who shoot indoors with artificial light and they get banding, striping, because the electronic shutter is kicked in. That's very hard to get rid of. So yeah, do have a browse of your camera's manual and find out exactly when electronic shutter is taking priority over mechanical and know when to turn it off, I think is the important thing. Mark was saying, did you do your overlay in Capture One for your Google Maps, or was that?
I did not.
No.
I used so for two reasons actually.
Yeah.
Number one, I can't do an overlay in Capture One. That's a pretty big reason. So we don't have the function in Capture One to put one image on top of the other and move them independently. The second is I had to do some stretching to make my image match the shape of the real or the aerial, the real head down version. And that stretching couldn't be done completely by Keystone. So it's been done through a warp in Photoshop. So one thing, and I hope that people are pretty clear on this, that will certainly, I know David doesn't, but I'll never shy away from the fact that Capture One is one of my tools.
Yeah, exactly.
There are other tools that we use for specific circumstances because they're better at certain things. And when it comes to manipulating content, certainly, Photoshop's got some amazing 3D tools to wrap things around cans and bottles and all the other stuff now. Capture One's not going to do that. So it's using the right tool for the right situation, and in this case, it's all about that ability to warp the image, which frankly a pixel editor is always going to do better.
Yeah, and you can pull a corner, stretch it, warping as well, liquefying, I guess as well. You've got loads of options if you wanted to shape something. Nigel was asking, other than for initial image compositional purposes, why use and save a mobile phone shot for a reference image in color rather than using the first shot from the camera? Well, I hope you saw that. Really,
the first shot is still raw.
The first shot is still raw. Really, it hasn't had. If you think of your iPhone shot or Android shot or whatever you're taking a picture with, it's quite heavily processed. It's way less raw, even though when you shoot on the iPhone, it's called, was it Pro Raw?
Apple Pro Raw.
Apple Pro Raw. It's still got some fair amount of editing in there.
I'm going to put a caveat onto what we've said, though, which is absolutely use a phone image as a reference, as long as your phone represents what you see. So I see people do this, and they use a filter on their phone camera.
Yeah. Completely.
So it's not reality. So if that's what you want to target, then fine. But if you're trying to target reality, make sure that what your phone is recording matches what your brain is seeing. And if it does, then it's a great reference. If it doesn't, it's pointless.
Yeah. If I go to my crappy out the window shot, look, you can look, there I am. Ruin the focus, of course. Like I should be focusing on the subjects, of course.
It gives you a color reference.
Gives me a color, like, oh yeah, because I was sad about that not coming out nice, and then okay, well actually this is how my camera phone records it. Surely it must be possible to drag that out the raw file, and of course it was. So if you're,
and also remember your white balance by your camera is based on what's in your composition, not necessarily the entire scene.
No, exactly.
So you can get some differences there too.
Yeah, cool. What was the title of Paul's blog post? What was it, Paul?
It's the picture with the tree. It's the complete guide, I think it is. Complete guide to... I'll put it in the comments of this YouTube video. But if you scroll down, it's the one with the Wanaka tree. There, this one. There you go.
Frame averaging complete guide. There you go. Right, actually, I can probably copy
It's
paste
quite
it.
theory-y.
Right.
Warning.
Warning.
There's examples in there, but it does explain the entire difference of separating out time from exposure, which is what it basically does.
Right. Nice one. Fantastic. Well, we should probably let these people go and watch the Apple presentation, if that's your thing, of course, and you want to. So again, yeah, thanks for joining us today, Paul. I've put that link on YouTube of your blog post. We will also, I'll put it in the description of the recording, which will go up on this page. So, sorry, Paul, I'm going to hide your face again once
I'm
more.
off.
So I'll just put that back there. So again, if you go to our live streams page, you'll see in the top right, September 12th, when is the final edit actually final. That will change to the recording at some time tomorrow, but that QR code will take you to that live stream page and you can see what's coming up for the rest of September as well. Otherwise, you just go to support.captureone.com and you'll find the live streams page just under the Learning Hub there as well. Nice one. So let's bring Paul's face back and say thanks again. Thanks for giving my voice a break so I wasn't hacking my way through it. But good lessons to learn.
Then thoughts and prayers, David's way.
Thoughts
Man
and prayers
flu.
my way. I know, exactly. Boo-hoo. It's 100 times worse than normal, of course. So thanks again, Paul, and yeah, everyone else, thanks for joining us and hope to see you online in the future as well. So take care and see you all later. Bye. Cheers, Paul.
Bye.
Bye.